Yeah, and really on that, is there anything really risk-free unless it's done in-house? Like, do you think I mean, there's always going to be a risk with third or like you said, even if it's fourth party, but if it's not really developed in-house, and again, I'm wondering if this is kind of like a catch 22, like you want to catch up with the industry, but which means you want to get to develop solutions quickly so then you can keep up with competitors. But at the same time, you have to balance the risk of all of data breaches and so on. So that's
But even, I mean, even when you're developing inside, right, you still have the insider threat issue, right?
right.
So
Yeah.
that's a different risk.
Yeah.
But understand what it is, right? Go into it understanding what it is, understanding what the shortcomings and benefits are, and then make sure, as any good, disaster response emergency planner thinks about it, is that in the event something fails, what do we do? Right? How do we address
Right.
it? And
Right.
and not saying that this is going to fail, but sometimes there's going to be unintended consequences. Are you comfortable with those? Are you comfortable with what it is? Have you set up buffers in the event that that does happen, especially with new technology? And that was one of the things that we heard from a lot of institutions, that they were going slow with the deployment.
Yeah.
Why? Because they weren't sure what it was, and they didn't want to risk their own reputation on some other vendor, right? I always use the
Hmm.
example, if you remember when Target had their breach many years ago, right? Nobody
Yeah.
remembers who the HVAC company was that caused the issue. Everybody remembers Target, right?
Right.
That'll be
Right.
with every financial institution, right? They get burned, and their customers don't say, "Well, it was some, tell me who it was." They're like, "No, we trusted you." Right? And
Right.
that level of
Right.
trust is key in there.
Yeah.
And so that's why they,
Yeah.
go slow, work through it, make sure it makes sense, make sure it's actually beneficial to what we're doing, as opposed to what they may hear, in the
Yeah.
media or for some salesperson or the
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm gonna maybe switch gears here a little bit, and it's something that's kind of relevant to what's just been in the news. We all know AI is, gradually abolishing entry-level positions, for definitely entry-level positions. But even I think it's not even it's even mid-level or senior level now, right? So I mean, just today we heard in the news, 16,000 people laid off at Amazon. I'm wondering what your thoughts on how can financial firms create and nurture the next generation of talent to basically become tomorrow's senior leaders in risk and technology. I mean, and maybe this is even the answer to this question could be applied throughout the economy, but specifically to financial sector. What should be done to, ensure that again, you're not gradually replacing all of the people that should be involved, right? And I think that's also mentioned in your report where I think some of the interviewees called it uh, augmentation intelligence, that's not artificial intelligence because they still want or believe in the people's and humans' involvement in it. So yeah, what are your thoughts on what should be done to grow this talent for the future to be future leaders in risk and technology and finance?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges here is firms have to figure out what the processes they are going to develop to be able to get senior leaders going forward. Now, the old model was you graduated high school, right, and then you got a job. Then it was you graduated high school, you went to college.
Yeah,
But either way, you went those paths. I heard from many folks in across the board, not just in the financial sector, that neither were giving them the skills that the firm needed, right? And those entry level jobs was where they groomed the people to be able to deliver what was needed for the firm to be done. Now, the question is, if you get rid of the entry level job, well, first, are you really getting rid of the entry level job? It sounds like what you need to do is change what the dynamic of an entry level job is. What's it supposed to do? Before, if you remember way back in the 70s and 80s, the entry level job was usually a typist, right? They were just typing stuff in. And then the personal computer came around, and guess what? There were no more typists, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
all these jobs are disappearing. But what they became more information technologists. They became more data entry people. They were different. It changed into something different, right? And if you remember, there was any commercial of, well, the old TV show Mad Men, right? In the 70s,
Yeah.
in the about the
Yeah.
50s and
Yeah.
60s, right?
Yeah.
There was the lady who was the secretary, whose job was to do whatever secretaries were doing back then. That job didn't disappear, right? They're now called admin assistants with a much different skill set to do that,
Hmm.
right? They don't take
Hmm.
dictation anymore because
Yeah.
the boss can type it in, but now they modify, they polish, they bring to the next level, they do other stuff. So how do you, but the key for the executive was I still need somebody to help me do X, Y, and Z, right? But now I have to identify that better. I have to know why I'm bringing these people in. What are they actually doing for me? How can they be more helpful to execute what needs to get done? But so and that's going to change the job, right, to some extent. But the leader or whoever still needs that position or those skills to get done. And how do you build that through? And then, but there are some jobs that are just going to go away, right? They may not exist. But how do you reskill those folks to other positions to be able to start to tell them, right? The kids who are in elementary school, grade school, high school, here's what we really need, and start to push the education system to make sure they graduate with the skills that are going to be required to be able to execute, right? 20 years ago, nobody heard of STEM, right? But now people talk about that. And you see coming out of high schools, people with STEM backgrounds now, they're being guided to there. Why? Because industry and society said we need STEM skills, right? We may not need other skills, but even like an auto mechanic. When I took auto mechanic in middle school, way back when, right, I learned how to play with a carburetor, of actually turning it, right? And now what do? If I were to do that today, I hook it up to a diagnostic machine and it takes care of that for me. But I still have to understand how to run the diagnostic machine. I still have to
Hmm.
understand whether or not the right output's coming, right? It's a different skill for the same job as auto mechanic. How do you continue to build that, right? To say, here's what we need and continue to train folks. There are going to be some people who may not be able to get to that level, right? Who are never going to be able to get that ability to understand and process that knowledge. We still have to figure out how we can use them in productive ways, right? What are the jobs that are going to be helpful for them? Because not everybody's going to be a knowledge management executive at the end of the day. How do we build those through, find those things that benefit from their individual skill sets? Everybody's good at something. Let's mine what they are. I always remember whenever I manage people, right? People said, what's the purpose of management? I always said it's to get the best out of that person of what they're capable of to deliver what we need to be able to get to the end state. Right. And some people were able to do it. Some we had to say, well, you know what? Maybe that's not your skill set, but this other one is, right? Identify that. If you have good leaders who then can say, here's how the pipeline is, here's how it's going to change, we can get something really beneficial out of that. That takes time, that takes effort, that takes thought, right? And that's what we're really going to need to work on, and firms are going to have to start to identify better, here's what I need, and then process that through the system, the educational system, their retraining systems, all those systems, to make sure the alignment is now the way it is today, supposed to be, as opposed to the way it was yesterday. That's the normal way industry evolves anyway, right?
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
identify, they broadcast, they push out, they train, right? You see many firms right now do training when somebody comes in. They don't assume you can do the thing. They make sure that you can do the thing by making sure you have the additional training. That's going to have to be, maybe that was called entry level jobs before. I don't know what it was called, but whatever that is now is where that new processes are going to exist.
That's interesting. And I think one more layer maybe here is for financial educational institutions to even, when graduates, basically to give them all the tools. So maybe change the curriculums, change the education or higher education to really take into account AI and how it can be integrated in all the different fields that current students when they're in university, so that they are equipped to deal with, all of these new technologies, whether it's in finance or even in like technology or software development, just to be able to. So I think there is a role there to play for education institutions, not to just keep the traditional way of teaching, but to actually evolve it
Yeah.
to,
I mean,
yeah,
if we can remember one thing we learned from COVID, right? Kids know how to be able to do remote learning, right?
yeah, yeah,
We didn't think you could ever have a kid do remote learning. They had to be in a classroom. They had to sit next to everybody else. They had to hear something from a teacher. And what we saw was kids were able to adapt to the technology. We
yeah.
also see kids are pretty good at using smartphones to do stuff that we
Hmm.
older adults have no
Yeah,
idea. I mean,
right.
that's why I get a little concerned sometimes when I hear people banning the use of cell phones by certain types of kids or different technologies. I'm just thinking, why are you putting your whole group of people, whatever that age is, behind the curve? Because all their peers are using that technology.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I know parents are afraid this is going to poison their mind. I lived through the 80s when heavy metal was out there and it was going to destroy everybody because had a parental advisory on it. And before that, I wouldn't be able to learn because I was watching TV all the time when I
Or
was
video
young.
games, if you
And
remember.
video games, right? It's just a new thing. It made me into somebody different because I was comfortable with the technology. I wasn't afraid of the technology.
Yeah.
I understood how to manipulate it to get to where I wanted to be. And if you keep thinking, this goes all the way back. If you think, rock and roll music, right? That was going to destroy the culture too.
Right.
No, right? It changes. Parents may or may not like it, but it's the way in which new things come out. And the
True.
great thing about people is they're adaptive, right? You give them something, most are going to try to figure out how to solve the problem, whatever that is in front of them, and move forward. So, the fear of technology, I understand some people are afraid of it. I understand why they're afraid of it. But the question is, are you harming yourself by removing certain aspects of that? And what are the things you're most concerned about? Right? If that's what it is, can we make buffers around that as opposed to just do a blanket ban, which
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
honestly just puts us behind the curve from everybody else.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Okay. I think there, we talk a lot about AI right now, and but I actually personally think there is a topic that is not discussed as much, as much as it should be, which is quantum computing, and especially AI combined with quantum computing. And I know that's something that you've done a lot of work on, and you've studied. So, and specifically, there is growing concern right now about the harvest now, decrypt later attacks, against financial data and as a quantum capabilities advance. So, how seriously do you think financial institutions should take post-quantum cryptography planning today? Because that is a one of the biggest, I guess, I'm not sure if it's say fears or concerns about quantum computing once quantum computing becomes, which could be in the next few years. So what do they need to do, financial institutions need to do now to address that? Is
Yeah.
it a risk or, yeah,
Yeah, I think they have to be thinking about it, right? They have to be able to figure out what type of post quantum encryption technology they're using. Does it meet the standards that are being developed by NIST and other organizations? And are they comfortable with it? Right? Are there vendors who may be holding some of this information, who have access to their systems using this technology, or are they not? Right? And why are they not? Right? How do you work through those issues? Because you're right, the harvest now, decrypt later is going to be an issue at some point. Now the information is already gone, right? And there's not much you can do. Luckily, a lot of the information may be useless, right? A stock trade
yeah,
that I made 10 years ago, I think that means nothing in 5 or 10 years, whenever a quantum computer comes about.
mhm,
But you know what? My name, address, social security number, if it's in that thing, is going to be pretty concerning. So, what you have to do is, I think, organizations have to talk to their vendors. They have to talk to the folks who they're dealing with and say, where are you on your quantum journey? Because we don't want that risk shifted over to us because you weren't comfortable with that space. And that's going to be really difficult, right? A difficult conversation. Many times the vendor may not be there. Maybe the vendor doesn't even know about quantum. I assume all of them do. But when I mean not know about it, not know about what can be done, how to be able to help themselves, to be able to help them, and their customers be in a better spot. So those kind of conversations are just going to be critical, right? Where are you in your journey? What have you been doing? Are you at a place where you can really provide that kind of comfort to me? The other side is, the organization, the financial institution, then has to figure out what happens if the vendor can't meet those necessarily requirements. What if there's no way that they can do that for whatever reason, right? Either the technology doesn't exist, they don't know how to deploy it within their environment or whatever, right? They're going to have to start to say, is this who I still want to deal with, right? Or
Mhm.
maybe it is, right? Because they want to deal with that vendor, but they're going to have to help them get to that spot. So it's not going to be us versus them. This has to be really that group environment working through that issue. Because I don't know when a quantum computer is going to come out. Today I heard maybe 2029. I don't know.
Yeah,
15 years ago,
20,
15 years
yeah,
ago, I heard it was going to be 5 years. So I don't
yeah.
know what the number is, but I from everyone I've talked to, it is going to happen. It is theoretically possible, and now just creating it. So how do you kind of work to that end state at the end of the day?
And if you were, designing a joint AI quantum risk agenda for regulators and the industry to take over the next decade, what would be two or three priorities that you would put to the top of the list, like
Mhm.
something that would need to be considered today, um, to
Yeah.
kind of avoid or not avoid, but be prepared for all of the risks and even opportunities that might come up with quantum
Yeah, I
AI.
think the first piece that's most critical is to have a frank, honest, open dialogue between the regulator and the regulatee, right? To be able to make sure that there's a pathway to be able to share information. Because I don't know if anybody has an answer, right? I don't know, just a couple of days ago, I was reading, AI is going to destroy the need for money. AI is going to destroy
Yeah.
the need to work. AI is going to, make me just sit around, I guess, maybe play golf all day. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I mean, maybe it is, or
Yeah.
maybe it's not. And
Yeah.
maybe it's just an additional tool like all the other tools I bought that told me they were going to help me, have leisurely jobs, or like you remember way back when, the paperless office. And every office I've been in still has paper in it, right? So maybe it won't hit that
That's right.
fruition.
Yeah.
But to be able to say, here's how we're going down, here's the path we're moving, right? To have that kind of thought leadership, and be able to have that honest conversation. But then secondly, to be able to say, here's my risk tolerances. Here's why I'm doing certain things. Here's what the reason why I think AI or quantum is going to help me get to a better spot. And then have that conversation with your regulator of like, do you see anything else out there? Am I missing something? What have you been seeing from the other organizations you talk to? Right. And if we do it right, the regulation will be informed by the way in which industry is working. Right. You hear so many times that regulation comes down from folks who are in Washington or wherever they're located and say this is how you should do it. And none of those people have any actual working, they've never actually worked in a institution to understand how it works. And I can give many examples across government where, people are putting out rules and the like who never stepped foot in an organization that was actually delivering whatever was being asked for, right? But how do you kind of change that? That's a mind shift from both sides, right? Because now institutions have to be comfortable showing their potential weaknesses to be able to say, here's where we have issues, and then use the regulator as a way to be able to help them solve those issues. Because most likely, if one institution has that problem, there are many other ones who have the same thing.
Mhm.
And it could be a
Mhm.
spot where government could really benefit and be able to say, okay, you're right. You 50, 100, 1,000 institutions don't have the resources or the commitment to solve the problem, but government can come in and work to be able to address it and make it available to everybody to address the challenge. So that could be something where it could be a real benefit at the end of the day, to have that kind of dialogue. So, I don't look at regulation as something of thou shall or thou shalt, right? At the end of the day, it should be here's how we're going to align with the way in which you're delivering. If there's an issue, we'll raise it. But if there's something that's really helpful, here's how we're going to get to that space.
I mean, yeah, and if we suppose that say quantum does happen in the next 5 years, do you think should this start now? Or is there time? Will there be a situation where we are not prepared? What are your thoughts on that? What should be done right now, like today?
Yeah, I mean, just back to your point of harvest now, decrypt later, right? If that's happening today, you still got to be thinking about, at this space. So can you wait 5 years and the one comes out? Any of your data is going to already be gone and be able to be encrypted,
Yeah,
de-encrypted. So, right, you have to have that thought now, right? What happens? And this is the way every executive is supposed to think, right? At the end of the day, what is the next risk that's coming down the line? How do I plan for it to get there? And that was one
yeah,
of the things I
yeah,
kept thinking about as the chief technology officer. Everybody always asked me, what's the state of the system today? I was like, I don't know, not my job, right? There's a CIO, there's a
yeah,
CISO who's supposed to be
yeah,
protecting it. My
yeah,
job is to think about how we create a system for 5 years, 10 years down the line to make
yeah,
sure we're aligned in that space.
right.
And, that's where you have to have some of that thought in front. Now, if you're an institution that can't have that because, your resources are more limited, you need to have that conversation with however you're going to get that, right? If that's through a vendor or someone else, trade associations and the like, what are you doing to help me get there? Right? What are you doing to help me get to that space? Because I may not have the ability to think through that because I have 10 other jobs I'm doing on a day. I don't want to say anything negative, but firms a lot of times think today because that's their job, right? Delivering
Yeah,
customers what they're asking for is the number one priority of every firm,
yeah,
right? And so how do you then think about, well, that future spot, but ask your vendors, ask whoever you normally rely upon, future state stuff to say, what are you doing in this space? How are you making sure that I'm ready for whatever that is? And,
yeah,
those kind of honest and frank dialogue is going to be very helpful, I think, at the end of the day.
yeah. So, I mean, thank you so much for all these great insights, Brian. I mean, before we close, I do want to ask one important question, I guess, for the audience, the people listening, leaders in banks and fintechs. So, for that audience, for leaders in banks and fintechs who are listening and maybe feel overwhelmed, what is one pragmatic first step that they could take in the next 90 days to improve how they manage AI-related cyber and fraud risks from your point of view?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, thinking about why are you concerned about it, right? Have you identified, and hopefully you're a knowledgeable professional or in your organization, why are you concerned about this going on, right? Based upon what you've already deployed, how your system is set up, why do you think this changes your risk posture? Why do you think this changes the response, recovery, resilience that you've already built into it? And then if you're able to identify your weak point, that's where you can focus your efforts. But the other thing is that, if you're not sure, right, there are resources out there. Reach out to folks to be able to get some better information. Listen to additional podcasts like these or other places to be able to start asking the question. Don't be afraid to ask vendors, I don't understand. Explain it to me. Right. And if they can't explain it to you, are you sure that's the vendor you want to be with?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it, we all know, right? From every time I watch anything on TV about AI, there's a lot of scary stuff out there, right? It's a lot of scary stuff. Does that have anything to do with me? I don't think so. Most of it, right? It has nothing
Mhm.
to do with me at all.
Mhm.
But if the areas that do have something with me, I should start asking that question. Why did that make me nervous? What's the thing out there that's going to change where I am or who I am or what I'm doing? And then work through that area. So it's a hard thing to do inner reflection because everybody's like, I think I'm pretty comfortable. Well, you know what? Self-assessment's not a bad thing. And then see what that is. And then, ask professionals, ask folks out there and see what they can do to help you.
Brian, I want to thank you so much for all of these great insights and your knowledge in this field. And I think there is definitely a lot of challenges and a lot of things to overcome, but it's important that we start looking at those today. And thank you for really clearly laying out all those issues and for the report. I felt it's an outstanding way to describe the current state of AI with financial institutions. So I really want to thank you for being here today.
If I can make one final comment,
Yeah,
don't
go
be
ahead, please.
afraid. Don't be afraid of the future, right? The future is coming no matter what, right? It may not be what you are today and it's going to change, but we always change, right? I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago, and I'm glad for that, right? I'm in a different spot. But think about the opportunities that come out of this and how can I address some of the challenges that I was never able to address before, or things that I didn't want to do before because they were too burdensome or just useless from my point of view, use of my time, but now I could be able to do that. So think about how you can harness the future to get to where you want to be.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Brian.